My name is Madeline Brosen. I'm the Deputy Director at the Lewis Center, and it's my pleasure to moderate our final panel of the day. We've heard a lot of great examples already today from different places, doing different things, and the point of this last panel is to talk about how we actually make them happen. So we've titled it New Governance Structures for Housing and Transportation Progress. It could be new approaches, it could be new lessons, new culture, but the idea is like, how do we actually take these ideas and start to find kind of pull the levers to make them happen? I'm going to introduce our speakers and have them each kind of have an opening prompt. We'll get into a conversation and have opportunity for your all continued participation. So starting at that side of the panel, Jessica Meaney. Jessica is the founder and executive director of Investing in Place. Her work focuses on how cities plan, fund, and govern public infrastructure, with an emphasis on sidewalks, streets, and parks as our interconnected public systems. Next to her is Alexander Jung. Alex is the Director of Urban Planning and Design at City Fabrick, focused on advancing equity through creative, community-driven planning. Through over 15 years experience across public, private, academic, nonprofit sector, Alex has led award-winning work out of Southern California. We're going to talk a lot about their work in Long Beach today. And we always want to make sure we do this. Alex is a graduate of the UCLA Urban Planning Program. And then also joining our panel is Elyse Lowe, who we've heard from this morning. And hopefully is maybe a little bit more refreshed and with us, but is still with us is the bottom line. So thank you all for that. So, so I want to start, we're going to hear opening remarks from our panel, and we'll start with Alex. So Alex, as a consultant in Long Beach, part of also what we want to do is kind of bring things a little bit more local. We heard from all the other places. And so in Long Beach, you worked closely with the city on a lot of planning efforts. And so can you walk us through how some of the kind of changes that are happening in housing and transportation, specifically on like long range planning or specific plans, and kind of how there's better coordination between these two sides of the house?
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. And hey, everyone, how's everyone doing after their meal? Pretty good? Pretty good. Awesome. Yeah, and before I answer that, I do want to just make a quick announcement, if that's okay. It was just announced this morning, that's why. But our organization, City Fabric, was just awarded Planning Firm of the Year by APA Los Angeles. So I just wanted to call that out. But some of the awards that we also won, in addition to that, are Transportation Plan, Urban Design, Advancing Diversity, and Outreach and Engagement. So I had to make that little bit of a plug that's kind of the background that we love to focus in at. But in terms of our work, one thing that Maddie had mentioned that I want to reiterate is I actually don't work for the city of Long Beach, but have been working with the city in Long Beach, I would say, for the past 10 years in this nonprofit role. But before then, I was also a consultant with the city of Long Beach, working on multimodal transportation projects, streetscape design. Eventually then, after I became in this nonprofit role, more so thinking about active transportation on the pedestrian level as well as the bicyclist level, helping the city with their pedestrian plan and bike master plan. Around that same time, maybe a little bit before then, other kind of long range planning efforts, and getting to kind of see that maybe 15 years ago and till now, and then also talking to colleagues who have seen kind of Long Beach's growth. I think there is a story to tell here when it comes to how city governments have been successfully doing long-range planning, and some of the lessons learned that maybe I could share in the next minute. You know, the city of Long Beach, just like many other cities here, had to plan for their land use elements, and this was a pretty foundational document kind of moving forward for the city. But even before then, the city had a lot of specific plans and things that they wanted to do. In the 90s, they had, their downtown plan to really try to attract, development in downtown. But then, with the blue line, aka the A line, there was a lot of development focused around transit-oriented development. And I think at that era of Long Beach, it was really about how do we get to the goals of housing and transportation and economic development, sustainability, as quick as we can, as best as we can, leveraging some of the political engines that we have. Now I think it's started to change. And I think over the past, 5, 10, 15 years, what's really changed that I've seen is the shift in, I think, in decision-making power, whereas before it was very much, siloed in each department. Also, the departments weren't really working with one another. Now you have on the internal side at the city, you have a lot of departments working with one another in work groups, and a singular goal of, here's a capital improvement infrastructure plan that we're aiming towards. And, I think there's been greater collaboration overall. And then, however, on the flip side of that, there's been a lot more work to try to make sure that community members are part of that planning process that I'm happy to share more later on.
I got it. Thanks. Yeah, just before we moved on to Jessica, because I think that it's a common thing we talk about. Oh, we need to not work in silos. We need to coordinate. Like, what started the coordination? Was there a motion? Was there someone that said, like, how did that actually change?
I've been thinking about this question actually for the past few days, because we're working also in other cities too, and I think what we've seen is that if there's one strong leadership, if you have a city manager or if you have a mayor who's really trying to push the agenda forward, and they kind of know how to work the political system and kind of the different departments and get people at the table, I think that's really powerful. And I also think it's a bottom-up approach too. So working with community-based organizations to encourage some of that kind of multidisciplinary thinking. And I think just in general, there's been a lot more conversations that have been happening both from a bottom up level and top down level from the city to say, hey, when we talk about housing, we're also talking about transportation. When we're talking about economic development, we're talking about open space. When we're talking about resiliency and all these things are interconnected. And I think the more that's on the city side, that message is being spread that, hey, this is all a common goal around public health and the well-being of our communities. That's when I think there's greater collaboration that could happen. But working groups have been really successful in implementing that action. Yep.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think we'll pick back up on that. Jessica, I want to turn to you next. So Investing in Place has been really laser focused on getting LA to adopt a capital infrastructure program. The first ever framework was released by the mayor's office last week, very recently. You're probably the person that has spent the most time really deep in the weeds of this. Can you share some of the highlights that you're really excited about? Or kind of where kind of these levers of coordination of getting everyone on the same goal? And what do you kind of think about what needs to structurally happen as kind of the next steps to actually getting to a plan?
Those are hard questions. Could you advance the slide? Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Meaney. A capital infrastructure program is a standard tool that governments all use. It's what are the assets we own? Private businesses use them too. What are the assets we own? What condition are they in? What does it cost to improve? And then you make a 5-year budget. The city of Los Angeles has not been operating with the CIP. The last one we've identified was in the 90s. City of LA is budgeting 1 year at a time with over 20 or so departments touching our public right of way. This slide, bear with me, I know it's really hard. We're just experimenting it, but let me show you what it's telling you. I could get the mic up. So we've been trying to map who's in charge of what. And again, there's so many things, we can't make it readable. Okay, so this says bike lanes, Department of Transportation. This says,
Sorry.
that's okay. Are you gonna try to maybe blow it up? I don't know.
Trying to figure out the Zoom.
Yeah, it's tricky. We're just working on it, but if you feel overwhelmed when you look at it, that's almost the point, right? But so Bureau of Street Services, they pave our streets. Who designs our streets? DOT. Who handles sweeping the streets, right? Who does tree trimming? Sometimes that's Water and Power. Sometimes that's Bureau of Street Services. Who does our murals? Department of Cultural Affairs. Who does, like, it's just crazy. EV charging station, bike share, bioswales, hawk signals, fire departments. I'm very interested in how we connect sidewalks, parks, and our public realm, how we're really investing in all of our shared spaces. That's why we include this. What a mess, right? Who's in charge? The good news is, as Maddie mentioned, 2 weeks ago, Mayor Bass released a framework for the city's first ever capital infrastructure program in 25 years. In it, it's not a CIP, but she lays out really important commitments to amend our city charter to have a 5-year CIP, to create a director of public works. They have about 75 assets, some good stuff. It's a really great start, and it's incredibly powerful when the mayor of the second biggest city is like, I'm on board, ready to do this. What's happening right now is the City of Los Angeles Council, the council, is talking about amending our charter to have a CIP, just like the mayor is recommending, and many people are. And now the decision point, the tension is who's in charge. Are we going to have a CIP coordinator, an administrative role, or are we going to, for the first time in a very long time, have a true director of public works? Why director of public works matters is in public works, there's our Bureau of Engineering, our Bureau of Sanitation, many bureaus that are touching our parks and rec, that are touching our infrastructure, like our technology, like they have their hands across many different places, so they could play a very key role in uniting our investments and our coordination. But like we've been talking about doing a CIP for over 15 years. It's really hard. I think when we talk about So I'm really focused on governance plus operations. I was a big fan of policy work for a really long time, but if we do policy without setting up the operations to deliver, we're really stuck. And I think the tension right now is about power. Are we willing to distribute power, be transparent, rethink things? Maybe. And I think if you're interested, the City of Los Angeles, the council will decide by June 4th who should be in charge of our CIP. They could decide to punt on it, and we just put it forward and we figure out that later. But I think there's a really important conversation and a consensus that I see growing up, like bubbling up all throughout LA, of common agreement that our public infrastructure is in a failed state, and what do we want to do as a city to bring it back to state of good repair.
Well, that's a great, yeah. It's a great place. Okay, so that's a great place to start. So Elyse, I want to kind of pick up from there and kind of give you an opportunity to kind of dig more into the weeds of what you shared with us about the kind of real progress that San Diego is making, has made, and kind of using Jessica's word, kind of setting up operations to actually deliver our policy goals. So can you share a bit about the process and the staffing changes that kind of your department or San Diego has done to really wrap around to kind of create this environment for delivering housing?
Sure. It's funny that this question is more focused on the public right-of-way, because one of the things that I did from a staffing changes perspective when I started as the director was I was picking up on the Fed's decision to essentially deregulate for the telecoms in the public right-of-ways, and was hearing that all of a sudden Verizon and all of these different, like Crown Castle and all these different companies wanted to go put fiber in our right-of-ways. And then I realized if I had to do those permits, then I wouldn't have the engineers to do the engineering, stormwater for the housing projects. And so I added 60 engineers. And my predecessors all were like, you are so dumb. That will never work out. You will have way more people. And they were all wrong. I needed more engineers than 60 engineers, because when 5 telecom companies can basically rip up every street in your entire city for miles and miles and miles and miles, you need a lot of people to be able to check their plans. So one of the first things I did was try to mitigate that impact so that we had enough people on our stormwater and drainage and grades and the other engineering needs that we had for civil. Um, the things that helped make San Diego successful, and I talked a little bit about it, was the will of the council to update the community plans, the hard work that was done there. Without that, we would not have been as successful as we are. So we're very lucky in that we had a very housing forward council, which smaller cities really aren't like that all the time. You know, the bigger cities, we have to be because we owe it to the people to be able to create the housing opportunities. But I remember watching housing going from being a very Republican thing, and then our council pretty much got flipped by labor, all Democrats, and then it became a housing forward council with Democrats. Labor obviously wanting to get a piece of that with their interest for PW, but we basically saw didn't matter what party you were, everybody wanted more housing in San Diego. The crisis was so bad. And so that really helped us. And then when we brought in Permit Now, which is a process within development services, I worked on it with the business community, but then when I realized what the demand was going to be for my Permit Now process, I limited it to only 100% affordable housing projects. Because you get this level of handholding when you come into our department. You have to be processing both your engineering and your building permits at the same time. Again, we will go through the process. Instead of the iterative review where we're like, oh, here's our comments back on whether or not your plans were complete, or, oh, you're missing this, you're missing that. They get one shot. We get one shot to review it. They come back, and then everybody has to sit in a room together. It's a big table. You have to be able to, you have to be a decision maker to be in the room. You have to be the person who can redline it, make the change. And that's how we were really able to cut down. We'd love to be able to do something like that for all of our mixed use housing projects, mixed incomes. I think that things will change greatly when we have more AI plan review and use that resource for our staff. But so between, you know, the will of the council, the housing forward, adding the staff, I have ended up adding 200 staff to development services to go from 500 to 700. And the way I was able to do that was be able to tell the council, don't think of me like a general fund department. We aren't paid at all by any tax dollars. We're 100% enterprise funded by all the developers. And so if you treat me in a budget hearing the same way you're going to treat the library department, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So it took 6 years of me pounding on that message to finally get it through people's heads, because our Department of Finance just thought, oh, well, that's not fair. You know, if they have to take a 20% budget cut, like, so do you. It's like, no, I have revenue. No, I don't. And so I was able to demonstrate with data. And the last thing that I would say, I don't know if there's another question about this, but we use Power BI to demonstrate everything that we can with all of our applicants to be able to show how long they've had a project and how long we have a project. And so now with visualization tools, I can negate the argument that the city is slow. Yeah. So there's been a number of different things we've done to change the process so that we can effectuate change.
That's great. So I want to kind of ask each of the panelists to highlight, I mean, I think everyone's kind of dug into this a little bit, but kind of, you know, one particular thing about an internal barrier that you kind of think has existed or does exist kind of within these change frameworks that you've described, whether it's a process or culture or habit that like reliably kills good ideas or is really kind of the resistance, and what you think could or has kind of moved the needle to overcome that. So let's start with Elyse and we'll kind of go back that way.
What kills good ideas? The just absolute like menial tasks of implementation and training can kill good ideas, because the business that we're in is so nuanced and it's so complicated that sometimes a great idea will be out there, but there's other regulations that prohibited that you didn't find out about until you went and talked to 5 other people as you worked to put forward an implementation plan. So what I have really been pushing in my department is that everybody who works there, they have to understand that we're in a constant state of change. And they don't like that because it's hard to learn the rules, change them, learn them again, change them, apply them. Oh, you didn't do that right. Oh, now you're going to get sued by the developer and the neighbors. So, but through COVID and all of that, we really just understood that if we don't see ourselves in a dynamic state of change all the time, we're going to fail. And I think that that is a fair expectation for people to come in and say, you're going to learn new things here every day. You're not just going to come in and do your job. So you're going to learn new things and apply them and get better at them. And then we work together to try to continue to improve our processes.
Have you found that people like it just kind of making it clear that no one is actually an expert? Like, how does that kind of work? Because I think that, you know, you come in with a specialized knowledge and you're like, oh, I'm an expert in XYZ, but you're trying to say, listen, everything's always changing. So does that, how does that kind of personnel or approach kind of, how do you square rapid change and trying to, and having specialized expertise?
Well, sometimes there's a lot of tears. I mean, people giving it their all and doing their job and realizing that it's even more complicated than what they thought. And that's on my applicant side as well as on my staff side. So grown men crying in my office is a thing that happens all the time. You know, it's hard to specifically answer that, but we just have a lot of open discussion about the complexity of the regs. We've stopped using like, oh, it's just this Senate bill. I can't remember all of those anymore. You saw the slide that I put up with like the 200. Here's the number of the bill. Don't tell me what the bill number is. Tell me what the bill does. And then I'll let you know if I know it or not, if I've utilized it. And so we've just really had to be supportive of each other. I mean, density bonus. How many of you regularly work on density bonus and talk to HCD about density bonus? Anyone? It's so complicated. Oh my gosh. The technical letters that we get, no one's the expert anymore, you know? And so I just feel like the team that we have that does the land development review, they are the experts, but they have my support in knowing that I've got their back in case something goes wrong.
Alex, what are you kind of thinking about of like something that's that kills good ideas or progress or things that are you've tried to work on to change?
No, thank you for the question. The first thought that came to my mind was around having trust and building trust and relationships internally, but also externally with community, with folks there too. But then, you know, there's also the fear of litigation, political pressures, grants and funding, and trying to align all that for implementation. But I think it also ultimately kind of comes down to building trust. I would say, because if you have trust, then people trust your ideas, whether it's coming internally or externally from the community or internally from City Hall, right? I think there's once there's more coordination and trust, I think, and strong relationships, I think there's movement that can happen.
I think the example. So, can you give an example of a place like?
Yeah.
So, I think you have to build the trust and have kind of an example like, okay, I trust you because we had a collective win or something like that. Is there an example that you can give
Yeah.
of something that really built trust?
Yeah, and going back to my original example of, I think, Long Beach in general, when we first started working there, we were kind of seen as like the sore on the back of the city, and you know, we would always be you know, putting our advocacy hat on at City Hall, at public hearings, you know, saying that the city needs to do more, they need to, you know, work together and get things done. And I think we've since started to try to work with the city more often than being adversarial with them. And I think that has built trust over the years, where originally I think we were always on the outside trying to work in on an advocacy level. As the years have gone by, the contracts that we've gotten have been where it's like, oh, they would hire a CBO to do the engagement. And now they're at the point where they're getting the CBO to lead the engagement. And now we're at the point where we're even doing all the planning and technical work as well behind all that as well. So most recently, we've been working with the city on a re uh, on an update to their downtown plan and their shoreline plan, and the city had hired two consulting agencies to support in that effort. And this was during the time when the development services, community development director was out of town. And when she had returned, she was like, why did you hire these two consultant groups? We have City Fabric here to be able to support us on that. So they were able to bring us in through a separate contract to make sure that, you know, the planning work had, you know, is going through, and creative ideas were able to be pushed. But we weren't able to do that 10 years ago. We had to build that trust with community and with the city. We like to consider ourselves, and we tell the city that we're an extension of your department as well. Yep.
Jessica, what besides the alphabet soup maze that you put up here, what are some of the kind of
Unreadable.
yeah.
For me, I'd probably say Prop 13. Like when we stripped public finance away for our public infrastructure and our continued 50 to 60 years shift towards valuing the individual and not the shared commons. I think a lot about if you have an awesome backyard, you're not too worried about the public park. Or if you have a really nice driveway and you drive your car, you're not too worried about how hot it is waiting for the bus. But I think that's not an individual's responsibility. I think that as a culture, we've just put the individual above the commons. And I think when we bankrupted our municipalities, like a lot of our infrastructure in Los Angeles had like some of its last big investments was the 70s. And that's in Prop 13 when we really started stripping our shared dollars to take care of our shared spaces.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a real downer at parties because people, you know, they're like, "Oh, what do you do? Work in planning?" And like within like 5 minutes, I can probably get to, well, the problem with your experience is because of Prop 13, and people don't really want that lecture over cocktail hour. But I do think it's actually important to name it because it's really a shift in the resources that are available, and so having to get super creative as we go around this beast is just something kind of worth talking about. So Elise and Alex, you kind of both have talked about, you know, housing and transportation, whether it's in the TOC or doing kind of coordinated plans. And I wanted to kind of have you each talk about what that departmental coordination looks like, because, you know, I think that maybe this kind of slide from Jessica kind of highlights, like, you have to figure out who's in charge, right? So in these coordination efforts, you know, who's leading and how is kind of their support from other necessary departments? Elise, you want to kick us off?
So when we're talking about private development, it's always going to be the applicant that's going in to push their project. And we are just the facilitator of process. So we at the city are not necessarily always the advocates for the project. Figuring out who's in charge in my department, it's very easy because we do have the one-stop shop. I have 9 different divisions, and I have the land use planners, I have the city engineer, I have the building construction safety, I have all the inspectors. And so for us, it's just a part of the process and the procedure. But for example, when we talk about complete communities where the city will give you extra FAR as an incentive if you're building the 40% of the base zoning on site as affordable for the density bonus. And then I mentioned that promenade earlier, right? So I can't tell you how many times this newer program came in and developers like, I proposed an affordable housing project and you guys told me I need to put in a 20-foot sidewalk. We're like, yeah. Like, no, you guys need to give us our land back. Don't make us do an easement. We need to be able to build more affordable units and just give you a little dinky sidewalk. And it's like, no, we removed all of your parking requirements so that you could be able to build more and be able to give us the space. So between the city engineer, the deputy city engineer, who's putting in that requirement in the project to have the promenade, and then the land use planner, they always are looking at each other's comments to make sure that we're on the same page. And then we also have each other's backs. So for us, the ultimate authority is within the department, and it's the staff member who's working on it. Every applicant always has the right to a guaranteed second opinion. So if they're like, no, you're wrong, we need to go to your boss. And sometimes they go a third opinion, a fourth opinion, a fifth opinion, and then they come to me. And I go back to, what did the engineer say? and that's usually how we manage it.
Alex? Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Maybe I could shed light on because Elise talked about maybe private sector and or private development company coming in, but from a maybe public sector side, at least based on our experience, it's been varying. You know, when we're working with the city of LA on any city of LA project, you know, the only way we've been really able to kind of move things forward is if we had political will behind it. We've been working with LADOT on a lot of that stuff. But I would say that in terms of departmental coordination, it, it really kind of going back originally, it has a lot to do with leadership. You know, if you have like a really strong uh, director of community development or development services and a aligned city manager and other folks in, you know, in these spaces and seats who are understanding that like, oh, you know, all these issues require us talking to one another and coordinating with one another. And is there any ways to think about how we can streamline that? And you know, cities talk to departments talk to one another, but in a way that, you know, is more about, you know, procedural as opposed to how can we actually get things done. And I think at least going back to the examples of Long Beach, what has worked in a size city of Long Beach was about 500,000. That is, it has a lot to do with you know, working groups. But in smaller cities, we found success when you just have that one or two, you know, director or you know, someone in leadership really pushing the needle forward. Sometimes it's also, you know, you could get interdepartmental coordination by, you know, advocating for it too, which is also something that, yeah, I think Jessica was speaking to as well.
So we can have good ideas, we can have new structures, but I think we have to wrap it kind of in accountability, right? Of like, how do we actually know and operationalize like new ideas and new approaches? So both the release of the CIP framework and the compression of permitting timelines are huge wins that I think will lead to better outcomes. But, you know, how do these kind of good ideas last in terms of, you know, it doesn't take just, you know, Elyse being really passionate about this or Jessica like just beating this drum for a long time. So kind of how have you thought about kind of governance and accountability structures that can kind of turn these great ideas that have momentum into more lasting change? Jessica, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's culture, right? I think, I don't know. I'm the one, so I've been talking about a CIP for a couple of years, and well, I'm a little tired, right? Like I've been saying the same thing, and some of you guys have heard it, so apologies. But what the beauty in a long run up to talking about a CIP and is that lots of people are talking about it. And there's almost a consensus that I hope would weather changes in administration, changes in leadership, that we are coming to a general understanding that the current system isn't working. We have to think bigger and we have to be more strategic. So I think, Maddie, to answer your question is, how do we get more people involved, finding the solutions and being the champions? And the bummer part is that's hard and it's long, but I think I'm really interested in, like, because we've seen really cool executive directives come and go. I was really fired up when Vision Zero happened in 2015. Really awesome idea. Nothing on operations, no ability to do multi-year planning, no ability to do long-term planning. It was like, fix it in a year, and if you don't, we're gonna give you a lot of shit. Like, and so I think like this, what makes me really optimistic about the CIP is not only is Mayor Bass talking about it, but Councilmember Rahman, another mayoral candidate, is talking about it. We're now talking about it in our mayoral races. Our council members are talking about it. Our GMs are talking about it. So I think that is like, how is it lots of our ideas and our solutions, I would hope, helps kind of transition us into doing things different in the city of LA.
Yeah, at least have you thought about kind of institutionalizing these changes?
So we created, amongst city departments, a mobility governance committee. It included the engineering capital projects department, who's responsible for development of CIPs, the city planning department, long range planning, transportation. They do sort of the daily maintenance of the city's roads. The mobility department, which the mayor just cut as a part of the budget because they got sort of absorbed into a different department, but sustainability and DSD all talking about how do we fit all of these things in the public right of way? How do we manage when there are conflicts in priorities? How do we figure out from a policy priority what's more important over here versus over here? And so we meet every other month. We have pretty detailed agendas. They're about usually 3-hour meetings where we're really getting into the woods and try to make sure everybody is educated at the same level about what the problems are within the city that we're trying to solve.
So in those meetings, is there what are the actions that come out of it? I mean, is it are you saying oh, we want to have how do you change the things that come up at the meetings?
I mean, it just really depends on what it is. A private developer building a very large multi-phased project had to build a quarter mile of a road that went past this project but then just ended because the city has an unfunded CIP that needs to extend that road to out to the next freeway over. And this large master plan community was promised that they were going to have access to rapid bus. So the developer said, I don't really want to build this small little butt of road when no one's ever going to use it and the city's not going to ever build this road. And we said, wait a second, you promised the community in all of your community meetings that you would support this. The mayor promised they would support this. This whole plan is based on having a rapid bus going through. So this is a chance for us to say, hey, not only are you going to build this small piece of road, but that's going to be our kickoff to get people to understand that if we don't have the funding for that CIP, that we need to start talking about that. And, we have a $7 billion infrastructure deficit. We put forth an infrastructure ballot measure last year. It lost by 4,000 votes. It would have provided us, $450 million to do a lot of the infrastructure that we needed to. And so, I reminded the young kid in the mayor's office, this is your pivot moment. This is when you say, okay, we're going to go push. We lost this time, but here's an example of what we have to do to push the ballot measure through in the following year so that we can actually get the plans or get the projects that we had planned for that the community will depend upon. So that's one example. In the mobility governance committee meeting, it was a confirmation that yes, that was a direction that we were going to go and everyone was on board with that.
So it sounds like in these whether it's Alex talking about a working group or this kind of governance committee, is that you can talk about specific things, but it kind of is bubbling up larger things that kind of give people ideas that what they could be working on so that everything is working a little bit better. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would love to keep asking questions. I want to turn it to you. So, Erin, do you want to turn it to Slido and some of our questions?
By the way, I love Slido, and it was because of this conference that I learned of Slido, and I bought it, and I use it all the time. So thank you for that.
Okay, so we don't have any questions on Slido yet, so
Okay,
please.
Slido doesn't work unless you actually put something in the Slido.
Yes. So slido.com.
Yeah,
Slash,
but
and then
Erin,
use
would
InterActions.
you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I will use the double moderator prerogative to ask my own question. So this is for Elyse. So you discussed, I would say, two major buckets of reforms in DSD, Department of Development Services. One are the technical changes, the staffing and policy, community plan updates that facilitate speed and certainty for developers. But the other that you really alluded to is a broad cultural shift within DSD that empowers staffers to help say yes and to move quickly. I've worked as a plan reviewer in a suburb of San Diego County, and I understand how it's really easy to say no to projects. It's part of a CYA. You don't want to be the person who messes something up, and so it's easier to say no. Can you talk a little bit more about how you and Mayor Gloria, other city leadership, have helped shift that default response from no to yes, or at least, hey, we'll help you? And what's something that we can take away from that here in Los Angeles?
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So my predecessor, when he was turning over the reins to me, he said, you have to continue the culture of yes. I was like, continue? Bro, you never started that. I'm like, let's get this thing going. And, you're absolutely right. It is so much easier to say no when there's a tricky decision to be made, or you're not exactly sure how the code applies because there's going to be like a gray spot. And so, um, I am a risk taker, which sometimes fails, but it's okay. Well, let's err on the side of yes. Um, I have also been sued 15 times this year alone for erring on the side of yes by NIMBYs. Luckily, the city attorney represents me, so I don't have to worry too much about it. But for the most part, we're solid in our thinking on our environmental documents, and we can go forward. And if erring on the side of yes is going to get me 10 more units, I'm going to err on the side of yes. So that's kind of all I have there.
Okay, I'll let this, is there Slido questions or just, okay, we'll keep going then. So Alex, in our transportation panel, we heard about the Bayview Community Shuttle. And this came out of a community plan that actually the MTC funded. They fund these community plans. And kind of our way of background is that like the community had wanted the shuttle for like a decade. And actually like it was really risking kind of tanking the whole community plan because of this kind of lack of trust. Like they said, we wanted the shuttle and it could just kind of not get off the ground. But that was a real win in kind of creating that, making that idea happen. So there's this model you talk about where the city funds community-based organizations and hires nonprofit consultants like you. But can you talk a little bit about this, kind of dig more into this model? Like besides just being like, we've kind of this idea, yes, you should pay nonprofits to be involved, but like, how does that actually get elevated? How is maybe an example of how it's actually changed something?
Yeah. Happy to answer that. And I think this kind of goes back to a couple of earlier questions too around like how do we change culture too. But in general, yeah, I think the thing that I've been seeing, at least working in Long Beach, has been that growing trust of, hey, we have talent here, with regards to actually hearing from community members and planning for the future of our communities. Long Beach, in itself has a high concentration of nonprofits in the area. So whether it be related to issues of housing and homelessness, transportation, or otherwise, I think there's a lot of groups with the know-how and the kind of political and community connections to move things forward. So I think what I've seen change though, I think is like, not just like, hey, let's give CBOs the contracts to do engagement and keep them in the box and, separate them from the technical planning team, which happens oftentimes. I think what we've been able to push forward is like, hey, we know what we're doing and we're able to talk about a lot of these issues and really ground it in community, which ultimately, if we're trying to talk about the long-term sustainability of whatever project or plan we're doing, it's not going to be held. I've seen so many plans, unfortunately, some on mine that have went onto the bookshelf and gathered dust. How do we make it implementable is definitely something that I think going in a more community-based model gives that ownership and stewardship of that plan and project over to the community so that they kind of become the bearers of that, generations long. The way I've seen it kind of manifest itself is about 12 years ago, we led a planning effort to decommission a freeway in Long Beach. And I'll repeat that again, decommission a freeway in Long Beach and transform it into a green belt to protect against the size of Central Park in New York, to protect against all the environmental emissions and everything that comes with the Port of LA and Long Beach. And it was a big, at the time, highly contentious and not many people were on board, but we had to do the groundwork of going out and talking to community members and working in hand in hand with the city and various different departments. And the plan got approved, yay. But this was 10 years ago. The magic of it being a community-owned effort is you had organizations who held on to that community plan more closely than the city did. They pulled it off of their shelves. They brought it to every public hearing and said, you promised us that we'd get this. And so you now have a plan that's not just a strategy for how to do public investment. It's also now an accountability document to make sure that you're, making things happen. Other things too, I think cultural shift is a big thing too. So, that one of the things that we've been doing is for the past 12 years is people's planning school. So we've been going out into communities, teaching them about what is transportation, what is housing, what is economic development, and really framing it on the angle of like, hey, this is not something that's pie in the sky policy conversation. Actually, you have the most power possibly to be able to show up at these public hearings and give testimony on like why things need to be the way they are. So by doing that, we've seen, I was just sharing at our table, we had actually around that freeway decommissioning, we had someone who had gone through our people's planning school 10 years ago who ended up now becoming the planning commissioner. That's how you create systems change on a lot of these things, is the culture shift. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really aligns well kind of to Jessica's point about like socializing change. Like it can't just be a particular department that's really kind of leading this, but once you're kind of infusing these ideas, they have a lot more kind of opportunity for legs. Jessica, we had another example of kind of something that was passed with overwhelming community support in Los Angeles, the passage of Healthy Streets LA. The idea that we're going to implement the mobility plan when streets are being repaved, and it's really not happening. And so, I think you kind of make a good pitch as to how someone that's in charge, could do that. If we had, for example, a director of public works, as part of the charter reform. So I just think plug if you were really interested in the CIP, kind of getting involved in the next step of charter reform is really important because that's kind of how we get these things into code. But can you just kind of break down a little bit why and kind of make the case for why a director of public works would make it so that, we might not see some of the lack of progress like we've seen since Healthy Streets LA passed?
Yeah, I mean, it's like somebody has to decide what the priorities are, and somebody has to decide when somebody's not doing their job. Somebody has to be in charge. And when we have general managers all at different levels, owning different aspects of the street, all jockeying for different things, overlaid with the culture that we have here in the city of LA of divide by 15, where our general managers are very incentivized to stay in the good graces of council members so that when their yearly budget comes up, they can get their department funded. There's just not a whole lot of protection for people who are trying to advance programs. And I think Healthy Streets LA is a really amazing example of why we need a CIP. It's born out of community members' frustration over the lack of improvement in our public right-of-way, but putting forth the mobility plan that was never intended to be an implementation plan and left all this fuzzy stuff up to what order do we do things, who's doing the long-term planning, who's doing the long-term budgeting, to almost no one, to maybe DOT, but not giving DOT the power to boss everybody else around to fall in line. And so you need a boss at some point who can hold staff accountable and set the ship. And right now, because we have no boss, I would say the most powerful person in the city of LA is our CAO, who sets the budget. So we are not setting our infrastructure investments based on need, strategy, citywide system management, but based on whoever has the highest power. And right now, that's the people who control our budget. And so I think the reason we want a director of public works is, A, it's a normal state of good practice, right? You need, like, even watching the charter reform discussions. So charter reform has like all these different sections, like expand the council, LAPD, planning changes, and usually there's a chief or a director who shows up and says, this is what I think should happen. When it comes to public works and the CIP, like you're looking at it like it's an outside voice. There is no one who represents all the 5 bureaus, the over 5,000 staff, the billions of dollars. There's the board of public works, which is a highly politicized group. And so we don't have the technical expertise, visionary boss who is really speaking on behalf of our public infrastructure. But it's really hard, right? So we had in 2000, so 1999 when we did charter reform, same freaking conversation was happening. Public Works is all fragmented. Nobody's really knows what they're doing. Nobody's in charge. They created a director of public works position, but they did not give this director of public works power over the bureaus, right? So there's 5 bureaus in public works. So you still had general managers who thought they were the same as the director of public works. So you kind of like, you're paper tiger, I don't know, like you're the boss, but you can't hire and fire. And so they decommissioned that and kind of got rid of it. So our current kind of director of public works is purely admin, but that's exactly the conversation we're having right now. Because can you imagine the existing people who are in positions of power see this as a threat, right? So when you talk about what stops us from change, well, power concedes nothing. Like, this is a tough conversation. And without the leadership from council and the mayor and everybody in this room and all of us, I think that's one of the reasons LA's infrastructure has stayed stuck so long, because it's a heavy lift. And we also, like, I really respect city staff there. We have the least amount of city staff we've had since 2008, right? So LA city staff are burnt out on a yearly budget cycle, always just trying to keep things afloat. And we don't have capacity in the city of Los Angeles right now for anyone who's thinking citywide, anyone who's thinking systems level for the infrastructure. We have lots of great programs and different parts, but we haven't invested in, besides the mayor, we have councils who are worried about their own districts, council staff who are worried about their own districts, but very few assets, leadership, money, resources to think, what do we need citywide? So it's hard to find the champions to kind of shift us towards this, but I watched Rules Committee talk about it last week, and I was really excited to hear what Harris Dawson, Councilmember Rahman, all these people, and their question is, who is accountable when things go wrong? Who do we call? Because that crazy image that you can't really read that I put up, like, it's not, an Angelino shouldn't have to know who the heck to call. Like, it's not on the responsibility of an Angelino to figure out how to get their sidewalk fixed. And so there's this growing conversation that maybe we're at the tipping point of actually putting someone we can hire and fire and, yell at, and they can be accountable. Because right now it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's that person. And I think that the Angelinos we're the ones who are paying the price for that.
So I'm going to combine a couple of our audience questions that kind of pick up on this Prop 13 point. And so Shane asks, partly because of Prop 13, we rely on development fees a lot for infrastructure upgrades and replacements. This doesn't seem very efficient. So he asks, how does the capital improvement plan direct more strategic investments in that context? And given that San Diego and Long Beach have these, and maybe kind of offer everyone to kind of weigh in on this. And then the other part, if you want to kind of either touch on that, which is like how does kind of CIP help us be more strategic? But we also, like in LA, we have to go to the voters a lot, and I think Elyse makes this point that if you have to go to the voters a lot, it's high risk, high reward, right? And so, how do we kind of think about whether it's gaining trust with voters or more sustainable kind of approaches to funding so it's not that? So I'm going to kind of start with Jessica. How does the CIP kind of direct more strategic investments?
Yeah, so my favorite thing about a CIP is understanding your assets, what condition it is, and how much it's going to cost. And then my favorite thing is having an open conversation about what the trade-offs are and what we want to prioritize. I would say right now there's trade-offs being made about we fix this one street light, but we don't do that. But none of us know, we don't know the scale. And also, as Elyse was saying, you can have your unfunded needs on your CIP, and then you can figure out what money do we need. And I think in a perfect world, we all work together and we do a CIP and we figure out what we're short, how much cash we need, what do we want to fix. And then through that process, we're rebuilding all the broken trust we have. I don't really trust LA government right now. Like, throwing money at the city of LA is not really what I'm advocating, but if we did an awesome CIP where we understood our needs and it was transparent, then we could do a revenue generating ballot measure. But I think right now we don't even know what it would cost to fix things. And I think we have to figure that out and then have a conversation about what people's priorities are.
Yeah, Elyse, have you seen kind of, how does this unfunded kind of part of your CIP motivate going after revenues?
I mean, very much so. I think the last I read was that LA had $1 billion revenue shortfall for the operating year. We were only at like 200 million, but the mayor had to do a lot of things. By the way, I can't believe I'm at a conference about housing and transportation. I did go take a nap earlier because I was about to fall asleep. But did you guys talk about parking?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good. I was like, when is parking coming up? Oh yeah, I walked out. But we started to charge for parking because that was something that we could do with our assets without having to go out to a vote. And unfortunately, it was a little bit of a clunky rollout, and people got pretty upset about it. The parking fees ended up being repealed, and now we only charge the tourists for parking. And if you're a resident, you could pay $5 and get a pass and park for free in Balboa Park. But the $20 million that it has generated has been huge for the smaller infrastructure projects around the park that make it more walkable. And so we've been trying to connect the dots with that, with parking. You know, the bigger pieces of the puzzle, we've just got a long ways to go. We're historically a low tax revenue city, and when we actually just tried to open up more funds by repealing the People's Ordinance of 1919, which said San Diegans shall never pay a direct bill for trash. And that was because pig farmers were taking the trash and getting paid to pick it up and then selling it, and they were double profiting, and San Diegans were outraged. So our trash service has been paid out of your property tax for the longest time. Well, finally people figured out it wasn't fair and equitable because people in apartments weren't getting the service and they were paying for it, and single family homeowners were getting it. We were able to repeal it and put forward on the ballot that it was going to be approximately $30 a month. Well, they put it out for the trash measure, and by the time they actually crunched all the numbers, it's $60 a month for your trash cleanup. And so the city just got sued and is likely going to have to pull back the whole thing and then not be able to go forward with the trash plan as it was now, and then pull $160 million out of this year's general fund. And so it's really, you know, it's a delicate dance that we have, trying to provide services and then dealing with the cost of infrastructure that obviously has increased so much, the tariffs as well as materials and labor and all the things. So, you know, I think the Prop 13 argument is one that comes up again and again. But when I hear from my developers about what we want them to put forward in work of the public right of way that is around their private project, they're like, you can't make me pay for that. The city should be paying for that. The city should be paying for those sidewalks. Well, there's no money for that, so you need to pay for it. Well, you can't put that on the backs of me. I'm an affordable housing developer, and I'm like, we can and we will.
There's one, we'll do the last question from Slido and then we'll wrap up. So, Mondi asked to Alex, which I think is a good question. You know, one of the biggest sources of opposition to housing and transit comes from the community. And so I do think we want to kind of unpack a little bit here to, you know, make it clear that, you know, community is not a homogenous group, that there are different voices. And so I guess how in your work do you try to make sure that there is, his question is, well, let's do it this way. How do you as a community planner advocate for the public good when there are sometimes community needs and community opposition maybe described similar ways?
Yeah, great question. Great question. And yeah, very true about that too. That yeah, can't. It's not grouping all community in one. Actually, that made me think about something I teach my team is that, like, you know, if you're in a public hearing and you have a room full of angry people yelling at you, and that's it, then you've done something wrong, I think, with the plan and engagement from the get-go. I think there that just is a sign that, you know, there is that, you know, public distrust, and there aren't that those groups who would be advocating for, you know, projects that, you know, align with a lot of the goals that we're thinking about, to also be in those rooms as well. I think it, you know, that's the main goal that we're aiming for, is to make sure that there is, you know, that understanding, but kind of taking a step back in terms of, like, you know, how do we hear from community without, you know, hearing from maybe the loudest voices, or making sure we're making informed decisions. Well, I'm glad we're at the Lewis Center because a lot of that has to do with data and education, and letting people know that, like, hey, you know, this is what's happening, and this is what's the history of not just planning, but like the development of a community, giving them that education, offering that understanding that, like, hey, you know, planning has historically been a tool of harm in a lot of communities, and being transparent about that, and having that being a starting place of conversation really opens up a lot of different things too. With that being said, I think it is about, yeah, like I said, data. We as much as we as an organization focus tremendously, if not half of our energy on like thinking about how can we be with community all the time, we're doing a lot of data analysis to try to understand and let folks know like, hey, these are the basis of understanding that we're coming from. I don't want to discount community-owned data and community knowledge as well, because I think there is merit to say that big data is also fallible, and there's a lot of inconsistencies with data just being stale. And also, how do you approach data from a equitable standpoint that's not centered around biases and things like that? So, thinking about that, not just in that methodology, and thinking not just in terms of the planning data that we do, but also the engagement. What are the questions that we're asking? Are we asking community members, hey, what color do you want to see the wall, blue or red? People are going to have a million opinions. We're not asked, and I think a lot of engagement is still like, what color wall do you want? It's how do we try to empower community members to make informed decisions, and then how do we ask the right questions? You know, we like to do a lot of role playing in our interactive activities, trying to build empathy. We do a lot of participatory budgeting. We do a lot of gamification to really try to break down these barriers to make it so that this thing called community engagement. We're trying to move beyond that to make it about ownership.
Join me in thanking our panel. I think that what we heard really is that we need a lot of people that are deeply committed to the work of how we get things done. I think that the three of you all really embodied the need for a long-term vision, the need for an inside-outside strategy, whether that's advocacy in government, private and public interests, the trust, being okay with being wrong, and just taking on big things. So thank you for that. I hope I didn't steal any kind of thoughts from Evelyn Blumenberg, who I'm going to invite up to give our closing remarks.